Jack Sanders didn't drive to the shelter to bring a dog home. He drove there to say goodbye. Grief had been heavy in his chest since his wife's passing, and silence in his house felt unbearable. Yet his hands had steered him to the Haven County Animal Shelter, almost without thought. The building was plain, gray, a little forgotten on the edge of town. Inside, it smelled faintly of disinfectant, filled with soft whimpers and hopeful barks. Jack had no intention of adopting. He was 62, a widower, a man with a garden he barely tended. His daughter called once a week, and neighbors waved politely, but life was hollow. That morning, in the mist and stillness, Jack believed he was only visiting to remember what companionship once felt like, just for a moment, before returning to his quiet house. But fate was waiting in the last kennel. Past rows of eager faces, tails wagging like banners, sat a dog who didn't move at all. A White Labrador, but not the glossy picture book kind. His coat was patchy, his frame thin, his brown eyes sunk deep with silence. He didn't bark, didn't wag, didn't flinch. He simply stared at the floor, a shadow among brighter souls. The card on his kennel said Rusty. No age, no history, only a thin note, found wandering alone by Route 10. Volunteers said he barely looked at people, never greeted visitors. Dogs like him rarely got chosen. Jack crouched in front of the bars. For a second, Rusty's eyes flicked up, meeting his. No spark, just a question. Something in that moment struck Jack harder than any bark or wag ever could. He recognized the look, an emptiness that mirrored his own. The volunteer hesitated, but Jack already knew this was the one.
Adoption papers were filled with a silence Jack didn't mind. The young volunteer warned him Rusty wasn't easy. He shut down when people came near, showed little interest in toys, treats, or play. But Jack only nodded. Maybe that was exactly why Rusty was meant for him. When the leash clipped onto Rusty's collar, the dog trembled but did not resist. He walked slowly beside Jack, paws cautious on the polished floor, as though the world itself was fragile beneath him. Outside, the air was cool, the sky gray. Jack opened the back door of his car, laying down an old fleece blanket. Rusty climbed in, curled tight as a shell, and shut his eyes. No bark, no whine, just stillness. Jack started the engine and drove. He had gone to say goodbye, but he was leaving with a silent, scarred dog who carried a story no one yet knew. The miles rolled by with only the sound of tires and the faint rattle of loose change in the cup holder. Jack checked the mirror often, half expecting Rusty to vanish, but the lab remained curled in the blanket, eyes closed, breath steady. The car still smelled faintly of lavender sachets his late wife once tucked into the seats. For the first time in months, that scent didn't make Jack's chest ache. It felt softened, shared. At the house, Rusty hesitated at the porch. Jack held the door open and stepped back, giving space. Slowly, Rusty crossed the threshold. He sniffed corners, furniture, the air itself, cautious but calm. His tail hung low but didn't tuck. That night, Jack left his bedroom door cracked. Around midnight, he heard soft nails clicking. Rusty curled up just outside the door, a sentinel keeping silent watch over the man he had just met.
The days that followed were marked by quiet routines. Rusty followed Jack at a distance, never begging, never pressing, but always near. On the porch with coffee, Rusty sat in the doorway, eyes scanning the yard. When Jack watered the garden, Rusty stood at the steps, watchful, as if guarding. Meals were eaten slowly, carefully, with no urgency. At night, Rusty chose the hallway, always close, but never inside the room, like a soldier on duty. Jack began to talk out loud again, not expecting replies, but narrating small tasks, remembering stories, sharing silences. Rusty didn't answer, but he listened. Each day, His eyes grew softer, his body a little less rigid. Trust didn't arrive in leaps, but in inches. Rusty wasn't a dog seeking attention, he was a survivor, learning to believe in safety again. And somehow, Jack realized, that was exactly what he himself was learning too. By the end of the first week, Jack realized Rusty had become more than a presence, he was becoming a rhythm. In the mornings, Rusty stood by the door, ready for walks. In the afternoons, he lay near the porch, nose twitching at the air. At night, his breathing filled the silence Jack had once dreaded. There were no games, no fetch, no tricks. Their bond was something quieter, something forged in grief and patience. Neighbors noticed Rusty too, his stillness, his quiet strength. He didn't bark like other dogs, he simply observed, steady and alert. Jack began to wonder if Rusty had lived through something that taught him to watch before trusting. That thought both broke Jack's heart and steadied it. Rehook. What hidden strength did this silent white lab carry? What would happen if the day came when that strength was needed?
Weeks unfolded into a rhythm. Jack rose with the sun, poured black coffee, and sat on the porch while Rusty settled nearby, always facing outward, always alert. Walks became steady rituals, no tugging, no rushing, just two souls moving at the same pace. Rusty's silence felt less like distance and more like devotion. He didn't need toys or treats to bond. He needed time. Jack found comfort in this. A man who once filled his house with chatter now found peace in walking side by side with a dog who said nothing at all. One crisp morning, as golden leaves began to scatter the sidewalks, Rusty stopped suddenly, ears pricked. He didn't bark. He simply stood still, nose high, eyes sharp. Jack waited, trusting Rusty's instincts. After a pause, Rusty moved again, calm but aware. Jack realized then, Rusty wasn't just a companion. He was a guardian in disguise. When Jack's daughter, Amanda, stopped by, she expected to find her father still living in silence. Instead, she found Rusty. At first, she kept her distance, but Rusty didn't retreat. He stood steady, eyes cautious but calm, body still. Jack watched closely. For weeks, Rusty had avoided strangers, but now he remained present. Amanda crouched, offering patience. Rusty didn't wag, but he didn't withdraw either. It was enough. Jack felt something shift. His daughter saw it too. The dog was no longer only his shadow. He was beginning to open his circle. Amanda stayed for coffee, speaking softly about her worries. Rusty lay near Jack's feet the entire time, a silent anchor. When Amanda left, she looked at her father differently. Jack knew she'd carry comfort home. He wasn't alone anymore. He had Rusty, and Rusty was teaching both of them that broken hearts could slowly start to mend.
Not long after, Amanda returned with Ellie, Jack's 6-year-old granddaughter. Jack was nervous. Children were unpredictable, full of sudden movements that might unsettle a cautious dog. But Ellie crouched low, her small voice calm, her hands still. Rusty watched her carefully, then sat, tail resting quietly on the floor. Slowly, Ellie extended her hand. Rusty leaned forward just enough and allowed her fingers to brush his head. His tail lifted once, a soft wag that lasted only a second. But it was enough to bring Jack to tears. For Ellie, it was a simple moment, meeting a dog and being accepted. For Jack, it was proof that Rusty could heal beyond his walls. That day, 3 generations sat in one room. Jack with his coffee,
Amanda with her knowing smile, Ellie with her drawings, and Rusty, quietly binding them all together in ways words never could. Neighbors began to notice the white lab who watched everything. The man mentioned how Rusty always sat at the window, steady and silent. Hank at the hardware store saw Rusty in the truck one day and said, "That dog looks like he's seen things." Jack only nodded. He knew it was true. Rusty wasn't just surviving, he was assessing, guarding, choosing when to trust. On walks, people smiled at them. Some children waved. Rusty never barked at strangers, never lunged, never cowered. He simply observed. Jack began to see it too. Rusty was attuned to the smallest shifts, a sentinel disguised as a shelter dog. Rehook. Was Rusty simply a companion, or was he preparing, quietly, for the day when his instincts would matter most?
Rusty soon became part of the neighborhood's rhythm. Children on bikes pointed at him, calling him the quiet dog. Older neighbors waved, often asking how Jack had trained him to be so calm. But there was no training. Rusty carried his stillness like armor. At night, his low growl would sometimes rumble if footsteps lingered too long near the yard. He never barked wildly, never panicked. He just let Jack know when something was off. Jack began to rely on that presence more than he admitted. The house no longer felt empty. It felt watched over. Rusty wasn't a pet filling silence. He was a partner, a presence that turned loneliness into shared peace. Jack wondered how he had survived so many nights without this dog's quiet watchfulness by his side. And for the first time in years, he didn't dread the night. He welcomed it. When Jack finally brought Rusty to the vet, he expected a long list of problems. But Dr. Patel smiled after the checkup. Rusty's weight was good, his eyes clear, his heart strong. "He's healthier than he looks," she said. Wasn't surprised. Rusty had been carrying strength since the moment they met, even if he didn't show it. Leaving the clinic, Jack felt proud. Not for himself, but for Rusty. For surviving whatever past had scarred him, for holding on long enough to be found. That night, Rusty stretched out by the fireplace, breathing deeply, content. Jack sat in the quiet and realized something. He no longer lived in a house full of silence. He lived in a home with a heartbeat. And in that heartbeat, steady and strong, was the rhythm of a bond growing deeper each day. It happened on an ordinary night. Jack was ready to sleep when Rusty began to pace, nails clicking urgently against the floor. His breathing was sharp, unsettled. Jack tried to calm him, but Rusty pulled toward the basement door, whining low. Uneasy, Jack followed. The air downstairs felt heavy. Rusty pawed at the furnace, barking once, sharp and insistent. Jack noticed the faint smell, something metallic, wrong. He shut the system down and called for inspection. The verdict the next morning? A blocked vent, dangerous levels of carbon monoxide beginning to build. Jack's chest went cold. If Rusty hadn't woken him, he might not have lived through the night. Rusty lay nearby, calm again, his eyes steady, as if nothing unusual had happened. Jack had gone to the shelter to save a dog, but was it Rusty who had already saved him? After that night, something shifted. Rusty began sleeping not outside the bedroom door, but inside, near Jack's bed. He didn't crowd, didn't beg for attention. He simply curled nearby, watchful even in rest. Jack felt safer with the weight of Rusty's presence close. The house seemed to breathe differently, no longer hollow, no longer empty. Jack started keeping the furnace serviced, but deep down he knew Rusty would always sense danger before he did. Their bond was no longer about loneliness, it was about survival, about two beings depending on each other. Jack found himself sleeping deeper, waking calmer.
When morning came, Rusty was always there, stretching beside the bed, ready for another day of watchfulness. Jack realized something he hadn't thought in months. He wasn't afraid of the future anymore, because whatever came, he wouldn't face it alone.
The first thunderstorm of the season tested Rusty in new ways. The sky cracked with sound, windows rattled with rain. Jack expected Rusty to cower, to hide. Instead, the white lab paced, restless, but then pressed himself against Jack's side on the couch. His body trembled slightly, but he stayed. Jack rested a hand on his back, feeling the storm in his own chest settle. Hours passed that way, man and dog facing thunder together. When the rain eased into soft drizzle, Rusty exhaled and rested his head on Jack's leg. For Jack, it was a revelation. This wasn't the behavior of a broken animal. This was resilience, the choice to stay, even in fear. Rusty had taught Jack something vital. Courage didn't mean not trembling. It meant standing beside someone anyway. And in that storm, they had both learned they could weather anything together. By late autumn, Rusty was eager for longer walks. Jack took him down the old lake trail, where fallen leaves painted the ground in copper and gold. Rusty walked with purpose, head high, tail steady. At the clearing, Jack sat on a weathered bench. Rusty didn't wander. He sat at Jack's side, facing the horizon, scanning the water as though it were his duty. Other dogs barked in the distance. Children laughed. Joggers passed. But Rusty remained calm, watchful. Jack realized then, this dog was no longer learning to trust. He had chosen his role. He was a guardian, not just of the house, but of Jack's very life. Rehook. Rusty wasn't just a rescued dog. He was a protector, waiting for the day when his vigilance would be tested in ways Jack couldn't yet imagine.
The first snowfall came in soft drifts, frosting the yard in silver. Jack opened the back door, uncertain how Rusty would react. To his surprise, the white lab bounded forward, paws scattering snow like sparks. He ran small loops, lifted his head to catch flakes on his nose, then returned to Jack's side, panting happily. Jack laughed, a sound he hadn't heard from himself in months. Rusty shook snow from his coat and sat, calm once more, but his eyes sparkled. That day, Jack felt something new. Rusty wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living, truly living. And in his joy, Jack felt his own spirit thaw. The house wasn't silent. The yard wasn't empty. Winter no longer loomed as a lonely season. With Rusty's paw prints across the snow, Jack realized he had been given something rare. Not just companionship, but a chance at life renewed. At the park, children ran and dogs barked, but Rusty remained calm. He sniffed cautiously when approached, then sat steady, watching. Parents noticed his composure, commenting on how gentle he seemed. Jack felt pride swell, not because Rusty was tame, but because he was trustworthy. One afternoon, a child dropped her mitten near the path. Rusty stopped, nudged it gently with his nose, then sat until Jack picked it up. They returned it to the girl, who smiled wide. Jack added it to his growing list of Rusty's milestones: guardian, rescuer, companion. Rusty wasn't noisy about his role. He didn't demand notice. He simply existed as a steady force, transforming every quiet act into something larger. Jack began to realize this was no ordinary dog. Rusty was a presence shaping not just his life, but the rhythm of an entire neighborhood.
One frosty afternoon, Rusty began to dig beneath the old maple tree in the yard. Jack assumed it was a squirrel's trail until he saw the dog pause, nose pressing against something buried. Curious,
Jack brushed the dirt aside and uncovered a small tin box, rusted at the edges. Inside was a folded note in faded ink. His wife's handwriting stared back at him. The message was simple: "Fill this house with laughter again." Jack froze, tears welling. He had forgotten the box, buried years ago during a spring cleaning with her. But Rusty had found it, unearthing words Jack desperately needed to remember. Rusty sat quietly beside him, watching. Was this just coincidence? Or was Rusty, somehow, the bridge between grief and healing that Jack had been waiting for? That evening, Jack pulled out an old box of holiday decorations. Dust clung to the flaps, untouched since his wife's passing. Among faded lights and brittle tinsel was an ornament with a picture of Rosie, their old golden retriever. Jack's hands trembled as he hung it near the top of the tree. Rusty approached, sniffed the ornament gently, then lay beside the hearth. For the first time, Jack didn't feel haunted by the past. He felt anchored by it. Rusty wasn't a replacement for Rosie or his wife. He was something else entirely. A continuation, a thread stitching broken pieces back together. As the tree glowed softly, Rusty's white coat reflected the light, and Jack realized he wasn't standing in a museum of memories anymore. He was standing in a living room, alive again, with a dog who belonged to both past and present.
Winter brought its dangers too. One morning, during a walk, Rusty pulled suddenly toward a side street. Jack followed, uneasy, until they found Mrs. Whitaker, the elderly neighbor, lying on the icy pavement. She had slipped, unable to get up. Rusty stayed close, pressing his body near hers for warmth while Jack called 911. He draped his coat over her, reassured by Rusty's steady presence. When paramedics arrived, Mrs. Whitaker clutched Rusty's fur, whispering gratitude. Rusty didn't move until she was safely inside the ambulance. That night, Jack reflected on how many lives Rusty had already touched. Rehook. This wasn't just a rescue dog. Rusty was becoming a quiet guardian for an entire neighborhood, an unseen sentinel protecting more than just one man's house. Word spread quickly about Rusty's role in helping Mrs. Whitaker. Neighbors left thank you notes, one even taped to Jack's door. The mailman slipped a card in the box, calling Rusty a joy to see each morning. Children pointed at the white lab on his walks, whispering, "That's the dog who helps people." Jack accepted the praise humbly, but he knew the truth. Rusty didn't act for recognition. He acted because it was who he was. A dog abandoned once had now become the anchor of an entire street. Jack began to see his own place differently. He wasn't the lonely widower anymore. He was part of a living community again, and Rusty was the bridge. For the first time in years, Jack felt not just connected, but useful, part of something larger, thanks to the silent dog who had chosen to stay by his side.
One cold afternoon, Rusty began pawing near the fence line. Jack thought it was another squirrel, but soon the dog unearthed something metallic. Brushing off dirt, Jack discovered an old dog tag, tarnished but legible. Buddy. He cleaned it gently, wondering who Buddy had been. The next day, Jack brought it to Hank at the hardware store. Hank's eyes widened. Years ago, a neighbor had lost a white lab named Buddy, a beloved family dog who had vanished without a trace. Jack brought the tag to young Noah, the boy next door. Noah's grandfather's eyes filled when he saw it. Rusty had uncovered not just a nameplate, but closure for a family. Rehook. What was it about Rusty that kept unearthing the past? Lost notes, forgotten tokens, long-buried truths, and giving them back to the living. Noah held the tag carefully, tears shining. Rusty sat beside him, calm and steady, as if knowing he had delivered something important. The boy's grandfather placed a hand on Rusty's head, whispering gratitude. For Jack, it was another sign. Rusty wasn't just healing him, he was mending entire families, stitching broken pieces across generations. That night, Jack stitched a stocking with Rusty's name and hung it beside his late wife Springsel. The living room felt whole again, not because grief had vanished, but because life had moved back in. Rusty watched from the rug, head resting on his paws, eyes soft. Jack realized this wasn't only about him being saved from loneliness, it was about Rusty reclaiming purpose after abandonment. Together, they weren't just surviving the winter, they were building something enduring, something rooted in trust, patience, and acts of quiet heroism that reached far beyond their walls.
As the holidays approached, Ellie visited often, bringing drawings of Rusty as a superhero with a red cape. Jack laughed, but deep down he knew it wasn't far from the truth. Amanda noticed the difference in her father, lighter, steadier, more live. Rusty accepted them both now, tail wagging gently, lying close to Ellie on the rug as she shared cookies. Jack stitched another stocking, this one bright red with Rusty's name embroidered. On Christmas Eve, the family sat together by the fire, Rusty curled in the center, their unspoken glue. Jack hadn't thought he'd ever feel joy in these traditions again, but Rusty's presence made it possible. In a season once marked only by loss, Jack found warmth. He didn't just have a dog, he had family again. And he realized he wasn't waiting to be rescued anymore. He was living the rescue, every day. Then came the night Rusty proved he was more than a companion. Jack was asleep when sudden noise rattled the back door. Two shadows forced their way in, thieves targeting what they thought was an easy house. But they hadn't counted on Rusty. The white lab exploded into action, barking sharp and fierce, charging forward with teeth bared. The intruders stumbled, startled as Rusty lunged, holding them at bay. Jack awoke, heart pounding, and dialed 911, while Rusty stood guard. Within minutes, police arrived, arresting the thieves. Rusty's chest heaved, but he never backed down until the danger was gone. Rehook. Jack thought he had rescued Rusty from the shelter, but now it was clear. The dog had been sent to rescue him in the moment it mattered most.
After the burglary, Rusty was no longer just Jack's companion. He was recognized as the true defender of the house. The police praised his bravery, neighbors called him a hero, but Jack knew Rusty had done exactly what came naturally, protecting his family. That night, as quiet returned, Rusty lay near the door, eyes open, ears twitching at every sound. Jack sat beside him, hand resting on his back, gratitude heavy in his chest. This was no ordinary bond. Rusty had saved him twice now, once from invisible danger and once from very real harm. Jack realized his home no longer felt vulnerable. It felt fortified, watched over, secure. And more than that, his heart no longer felt empty. It was guarded by loyalty, filled with trust, and strengthened by the presence of a dog who had turned grief into courage, silence into safety. In the days that followed, Jack noticed how ordinary life now glowed with quiet miracles. Rusty perched on the windowsill, watching the world with calm eyes. His tail thumped when Ellie visited. His body leaned gently against Amanda when she sat nearby. Even neighbors paused to greet him on walks. Jack felt pride, not for ownership, but for partnership. Rusty wasn't decoration. He was the living proof that healing didn't come with grand gestures. It arrived slowly, like the first light at dawn, filling rooms that once felt hollow. Rehook. Healing wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Sometimes it looked exactly like this: a white lab sitting in a windowsill, keeping watch over everything Jack had once thought he'd lost forever.
Jack began writing a list. Not chores, not bills, but lessons Rusty had taught him. 1. Listen with your whole body. 2. Protect what matters. 3. Love doesn't need words. 4. Courage comes in silence. 5.
Healing doesn't erase scars, it makes them part of the story. Each entry filled Jack's heart with recognition. Rusty wasn't just living beside him, he was teaching him, reshaping how Jack saw the world. That night, Jack read the list by firelight, Rusty pressed close at his side. The house no longer felt like a place of mourning, it felt like a classroom of second chances. Jack had thought he was too old to change, too tired to hope. But Rusty had proven him wrong. Healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about learning, together, how to live again. 1 year after that first drive to the shelter, Jack sat on his porch with Rusty at his feet. The wind chimes clinked softly. The yard stretched before them, not empty, but alive. Jack thought back to that day, when he had gone only to say goodbye. Instead, he had walked out with a broken white lab who had become his guardian, his companion, his healer. Rusty had saved him from silent nights, from unseen dangers from the hands of thieves. He had saved neighbors, uncovered memories, restored trust. Jack looked down at the dog leaning against his leg and realized the truth. He hadn't rescued Rusty at all. Rusty had rescued him. Final rehook. Sometimes the dog you save is the one who saves you, and in that rescue, both lives begin again.